and Kuwait. After the discussion of the foreign aid topic this morning, I would certainly be open to just using the informal names rather than the formal names. Partly because of the words just said, partly because there's not a direct government to government action of the resolution. So I don't think that that part would be particularly important. But most of what we discussed in the Marshall Committee was which countries to include and exclude.
That would, just to clarify, that would make it South Korea, right?
Yes, that would make it South Korea.
The only other question I have is 2010 to 11 was military and or police, thinking about just like no police this time. Just wanted to hear your rationale.
Yeah, in 2010, my understanding was the police presence was primarily because of what we had left in Iraq after we had done most of the withdrawal. I don't think that, at least based on my understanding of what that topic was, police acts were particularly popular or important to the topic. And I think for each of these four countries, military much more defines what we have there than police.
Makes sense to me.
Is there a motion on the floor?
Yeah. I motion to institute cats as change the one.
Is there a second?
Second.
Do we need to discuss that?
That's what we're.
Yeah, we should probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to
Sorry.
add
South
South.
Korea.
Probably an important.
Just a little.
Yeah. We also need to take out the first the.
Yes.
Wouldn't we theoretically also have to move south to the end since we usually alphabetize things now that it's South Korea? And
We'll take.
Yeah. Okay, shall we vote on accepting these changes? All those in favor? Please make that so. Well, now we're all watching you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think this is good. I
Yeah,
think it's good.
I will motion to approve this.
Second.
There's an extra space. I'll
I
second.
was saying, I said
Four.
No, that space is very important.
Kuwait needs to be.
Oh, no. Oh, I did have one more question. I think you talked about this yesterday. The reason for significantly now versus substantially then is because significant reduction has term of art meaning, yes?
Yes, we found government definitions in the context of military presence for a significant reduction that we did not find for a substantial reduction.
Yep, we'll discuss that.
Great.
Next
All right, motion to approve. Motion to approve.
Seconded.
Could be the easiest one all day.
Okay, there is a motion and a second on the floor to accept as is. The United States federal government should significantly reduce its military presence in one or more of the following: Bahrain, Japan, Kuwait, South Korea. In favor? Thank you very much.
Cool.
Hey.
Nice.
Central Asia, come on down. I'd also like to invite James to pronounce all of these. Okay, very well.
While we're waiting for that out there, just in case anybody at home would like to, and this is being live streamed, if they want to hear the conversation, you can find the link on the NFHS YouTube channel or on our great topic.
Good morning, topic open.
Hello.
So the main thing in the Marshall Committee was working on what appears to be sort of the trend in the other topic papers is the using what we call the informal names of the nations versus the formal names, and so shortening the that part of the resolution along with the phrase diplomatic and or economic engagement, which is consistent with resolutions.
Questions, comments?
Hey, So question about just listing out the countries versus the same thing that Elle's thing ended up with like one or more Central Asian countries.
Okay, so the reason for that is that there's a UNESCO definition that says that Central Asia can include Northeast Iran, Pakistan,
Got it.
Northern India, Western China. And that would open up, our fear would be that then everyone would focus on things like the Uyghurs and Kashmir and Iran. And really not what we had intended to be the central focus of the resolution, which is to focus on these countries that, although we don't hear a whole lot about them, are within, the short to midterm, likely to become much more important.
That makes sense. Does making it Central Asian countries solve the argument that's like partial regions of other countries though?
I would say no, because then it would include Iran and it would include Afghanistan
Okay.
for sure, because it's a UNESCO definition.
That makes sense to me.
I move to approve.
I need to think for a second.
Okay. I'll second for discussion while we're thinking.
I don't know.
Maybe like a question / comment. This topic not like really, really big.
Is what?
Like this topic feels really big. I don't know much about this topic area, but it does seem to be like very, very large.
Was there any discussion in the Marshall Committee about ways to maybe narrow the focus of what the diplomatic or economic engagement could cover? Because that seems like a very broad terrain of things.
So it in our Marshall, it's like kind of yes and no. It is very broad, but the solvency advocates and advantage areas are so limited in these areas that it's hard to imagine a credible affirmative being some of those smaller things. Now, so there are definitely like edge cases, but I think a lot of apps in here will focus on like combating Russia and finding rare earth minerals.
Yeah, and counterterrorism. So, and perhaps some stuff related to narcotics, but yeah, in terms of, can I envision 200 things we could theoretically do? Yes.
You think the solvency
Are there
advocates should-
solvency advocates for 200 things? No.
Okay.
Also, in the Marshall, we talked a bit about human rights issues, concerns over freedom of the press and, gender rights and that kind of stuff. So those are big areas that would be attention getting, but they're big areas in a part of the world where the solvency advocates are still not, 1,000
Democracy
sources.
promotion as well. So I mean, I think there's in terms of the things that you're actually likely to not lose to negs that just go, their solvency evidence is really sketchy on this and very, very imprecise. It's a pretty stable ground.
Dr. Edwards?
I think the other thing that limits the breadth of this topic is the stable negative ground is probably not going to be affected very much by whatever little tiny economic thing, because it's still going to be Russia and or China that the negative would go to in terms of the relational impact. So, and in some ways, the tinier the change the affirmative makes, the easier it is for the big generic to control it.
And at the time that we wrote this paper, Iran as well, but of course, the new president, that's may change the or how effective that argument might be.
Lauren?
I'm good. Yeah, that helps.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor that has been seconded to accept as is. The United States federal government should substantially increase its diplomatic and or economic engagement with one or more of the following: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. All those in favor of the stands? Any opposed? No sitting. Thank you.
Nice. 2 in 10 minutes.
Nation state recognition.
Here
Come
we go.
on, be recognized. Dun, dun, dun. Welcome back.
Yes.
Okay, so the Marshall Committee yesterday was mostly focused on what phraseology to use in the absence of a list. We settled on de facto states after a night of vetting. I feel better about de facto states, not worse. That is where I am at.
Questions, comments?
Clarifying one more time, we should get rid of Oklahoma, is that correct? Okay, no offense to any Oklahoma people present. Okay.
Behind you.
Confident on de facto states is the language we like?
I think so.
No, it's fine if the answer is yes. I was not trying to question. I just know that came up a bunch in the Marshall and I just wanted to know what.
I believe yes. I mean, after a night of reading and then some more reading this morning, it is what I am most confident about. Yes.
Yeah, great. That was it. Right.
Just for the uninitiated, what is and is not included in de facto state, either like list of countries or concepts?
Do you have the card that I sent you yesterday, Brett? I didn't bring my
No,
computer. I can go get it.
Yeah.
But
De facto states are separatist entities that exercise a monopoly over a given territory but lack universal recognition. I define the de facto state as a polity that belongs to a recognized country, seeks some degree of separation from that country, and has declared independence, exerts military control over a territory or portions of territory inhabited by a permanent population, performs at least basic governance functions, lacks international legal sovereignty, and exists for at least 24 months. D. Floria, 14, lecturer and assistant professor in international relations at the University of Glasgow, Scotland, de facto states and international politics, 1945 through 2011, a new data set.
I move to accept. Second.
Okay, there is a motion and a second on the floor. Yes. Comment?
I'm not sure this is, I just want to clarify, this is literally hundreds of things around the world. I mean, like Algeria alone has dozens of movements that arguably could be called de facto states. I mean, like when you.
I mean, arguably, but do they, well, yeah. So like, we intentionally did not use the phrase separatist movements, right? So.
Separatist movements in many cases after 24 months can arguably be considered de facto states. I mean, we debated this internationally as the US, and this is hundreds. And then you throw in the Native American tribes, I mean, what about Canadian tribes, Aboriginal peoples in Australia? I mean, we'll actually enjoy this, probably have fun with it, but this is like unlimited in scope. And if that's out of line, I genuinely apologize. I want to follow parliamentary procedure, but I'm really interested in this. I just want to make sure that's your intent, that it's enormous.
Okay, so first I sort of want to respond to that a little bit. So one part of the discussion and thought behind this is that the smaller that an affirmative gets, the easier it will likely be to beat that affirmative on a disadvantage. There are pretty good arguments that indicate that a policy of state recognition would require establishing diplomatic relations with that particular area. We would have to establish an embassy. We would have to assign a diplomat. We would have to do a variety of different things. It would shift our focus away from dealing with other pressing world concerns diplomatically. It would also probably galvanize movements in other areas if the United States were for example, recognize some random separatist entity in Algeria. as opposed to recognizing a much more formal ally like Taiwan, Palestine, or something like that, that would lead those movements to have, further credibility, which is one of the main negative positions. So while there is perhaps an argument that people could make that there are a lot of different affirmatives, the negative ground against those affirmatives is relatively good. The second thing that I would say to that is that the definitions of de facto states would allow for pretty good T arguments against a lot of those small affirmatives, because the definition that I read did not just say any separatist movement that exists for 24 months. There's a litany of other things that are necessary in order for something to be considered a de facto.
I actually have one comment and then a couple of questions here. First, I just said have another definition of de facto state that may help to clarify. But I guess the question I have is, to what degree is there ground or how many of these de facto states have a stable body of solvency advocates? Either as a number or the percentage of that. And then I guess it's really the question about the stable ground.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously haven't looked into like every single thing that might be identified to be a de facto state by any particular author. The number of solvency advocates, especially recent solvency advocates for a lot of these different things, is more limited than you would probably imagine. I found solvency advocates from 2022 to 2024. They're included in the bibliography for like 6 to 7 places, but I admittedly did not look for like 500.
One also additional consideration with like, particular tribes, especially when we're talking about geographic context like the United States versus Canada versus Australia. Most of those solvency advocates don't say recognize only one Aboriginal people. They say recognize Aboriginal people. And so like most of those solvency advocates require pretty large action from the government.
Alice, do we need like I just don't know about the literature because I haven't looked into it enough. Do we need national state recognition or nation state recognition in front of the phrase state recognition? Or does the literature use state recognition?
So the definitions in the paper are all of state recognition.
Okay.
And they're like pretty definitive and
Okay.
authoritative. So
That's good.
yeah.
Did that answer your question or concern?
No, it just confirms my concern, but that's okay. That's okay. Everybody's good with that. I'm good.
Okay, there's a motion and a second on the floor to accept. As is, the United States federal government should grant state recognition to one or more de facto states. All those in favor? Opposed? Accepted. Thank you. Human trafficking. Here's where the wheels. And here's where the wheels. I want to be a transformer. We're going to try. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Not fine, thank you. So you'll see that this is familiar to something we've already seen this morning. One of the issues that we came up with that I came up with in writing the paper and continued to come up in the Marshall subcommittee was how to create a topic that would have adequate and appropriate negative ground for students. So we had a lot of discussion about a lot of different things, but talked about limiting to certain categories of trafficking, or specifying collaboration with different groups. But ultimately, my wording committee members who were in the room conferred with the wording committee members in the transnational organized crime room. And we came up with this in the hopes that perhaps we could, what's the correct term for merge with transnational organized crime. One of the big things in trafficking is falls under the auspices of transnational organized crime, as described by the UN. So it fits in that same area, and then that would allow the topic to be potentially discussed, but would allow a bit more flexibility.
Yeah, I think it's something Lauren came and talked to us. We were like, yeah, we're amenable to figuring it out. I don't know if we want to do that now or in the callback for transnational organized crime, but definitely seems like something that could be a good merge. And obviously depends on Clint's takes.
Clint,
Clint.
so there's a conversation about merging this into transnational organized crime. Are you amenable to that?
How would that work?
It's just like one of the areas, maybe.
Oh, add an area.
Add an
to
area, yeah.
drafting?
Yeah.
I.
Okay. That's fine.
I mean, somebody can still do it.
What do you want to do?
Yeah, that's fine. That's, I understand you selected your areas with intention. It's not,
Yeah, like.
So how do you feel about it now as it stands on its own?
I am not convinced as it stands on its own that we have an adequate negative ground for students. I think it would have to be part of something else, but if Clint's not amenable, then I don't want to force my topic into his topic. That does not seem like the way I want to be doing business.
I think the potential lack of negative ground would apply just as much there. It would allow AFS to run just something on human trafficking and not worry about the others, because it's not going to be that they need to do all of the issues. So if firms can just pick human trafficking, it's still going to be the same issue.
That's a good point.
So as an author, do you have a recommendation? If you're concerned that there's not neg ground and we can't get to neg ground.
I feel like our conversation, the Marshall subcommittee, we had some other options. I don't remember what.
Did we change in the other international interdiction topic? Did we remove or keep efforts? Do we need the word?
Let me scroll back up there.
Efforts?
I think that's consistent with what we
We
changed
kept
it to.
Okay, I just didn't remember and I thought that one had been vetted, so I was trying to.
Yeah.
Okay.
For a recommendation from the wording
Yeah.
committees?
So the things that we talked about, narrowing to allow a bit more discussion, we had where forced labor, debt bond, servitude rather than.
Efforts combating? That's what we changed, or that's what the other one ended on. Efforts combating, and sorry, Ricker, was this one of the things that you were going to vet?
Yeah.
For transnational interdiction, transnational organized crime, I mean?
I didn't really plan to do it myself, but yeah.
Sorry. I was-
Yeah.
No.
Ask for it to
Did
be
that, what was
Yeah.
happening?
Combating
With that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that should also happen for this, in terms of just like generic wording issues. And this does not resolve any of the issues on the table. This was a new issue that was my bad that I brought up. Sorry.
I move that we substitute combating for of. So it should say international interdiction efforts combating transnational human trafficking.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposition? Please make that change. That did not change the
It
substantial.
still doesn't answer the negative ground argument, but it's a cleaner wording.
There are more like government phrases that talk about this, about combating, so.
And vote.
I don't really know if there are wording changes.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we can,
Move to accept.
I mean, there's limited negative
One second.
ground. There's some.
Move to accept, let it go to the vote.
Yeah.
Second.
Second, yeah.
Okay, all those in favor? Thank you. Thank you. Hey, can we, it's the next author here. We're a little bit ahead, but I would love to keep going.
Let's go. Yeah, we can get all of it done for lunch, and then we just call back
And then
after
we have
lunch.
a lunch,
That would be
and then we can
fantastic.
have a nap this afternoon.
Honestly, would you be able to? I'll ask you after this. If we can just move the 3 o'clock up to right after the callbacks,
Yeah, I would look like that too.
and then we're just done for the day.
Yeah,
early.
that's what we've
Yeah,
done
and
in
then
the
we're
past.
just done for the day,
That's what we've
yeah.
done in the past, yeah.
Oh, definitely.
It'd be great.
You're
Just done at
all in
2:30 or 3. Great.
Yes.
Good morning.
Hello,
We don't take a
okay.
big gap.
So the big thing that came out of Marshall was the unification of the term state-sponsored international terrorism. And the primary reason for integrating the word international was that if you left it as state-sponsored terrorism, it opens up the possibility that you're involving the United States in things that are generally perceived as internal. So for example, taking action to protect the Uyghurs in China would be considered topical under the resolution. And there was even the argument that doing things to restrict US police powers might be considered topical in a world where international doesn't exist. That was the big thing that came out of Marshall.
So the state-sponsored terrorism, is a term of art that would be sort of capitalized, has very clear and specific definitions, is very good legally defined and articulated, which I think would be better than state-sponsored international terrorism, which does not have that clean definition. I also just a question to the author is kind of the purpose of the topic to be more about like operations or more about the assistance and sanctioning side of counterterrorism? Those are two distinct things.
Yeah, I don't think in the research that I did, I didn't really draw a distinction between operations and sanctions.
So operations are done by the Department of Defense, and sanctions and non-military
Department
systems
of State.
are Department of State.
Yeah.
And that's very clearly defined.
Mhm.
So unless we kind of want that, we want the topic kind of just be whatever, then we don't need to change it. But if we want to kind of narrow it down a bit, if we might want to emphasize or focus.
Bruce?
I would move that we move international. And I don't know what the difference is, but it might go in one of two places. It could be strengthen its international counterterrorism policies or strengthen its counterterrorism policies to combat international state-sponsored terrorism. I'm not sure which would be better, but I agree with the term of art, state-sponsored terrorism is the phrase. So I think international needs to be moved, and I would suggest one of those two places, but open to suggestion on that.
Right, do you want to address that?
I was gonna say the same thing.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, so where, can I have where you would like to place that, please?
Does anyone else have any preferences as to where that should be placed?
I think we should discuss. But
Yeah.
I mean, I do think we should strike it from where it currently is, for
Yes.
sure.
Okay, gets international, can we move it behind its, strengthen its international counterterrorism policies to combat? And then the term of art would be state-sponsored terrorism.
Can I just motion to
International,
strike?
one of those two spots, but
Yeah.
I don't know which one.
Yeah, can I just motion to strike and then we discuss which of the two?
Okay,
Does that make sense? Like split it up into two different things?
Sure.
Second.
All those in
Got
favor of
those
striking international from where it currently lived? Okay.
Sure.
All right, so please take it away from there.
Awesome.
All right, so now we are entertaining a motion to insert international either at behind its or behind combat.
I don't know where it fits better to get at what we want, but I think international needs to be there somewhere.
So if state-sponsored terrorism becomes capitalized, then the word international is not necessary. Because state-sponsored terrorism is a very formal legal definition that I don't think would be able to topically, include the United States. It's kind of a bit, like the US is going, like, in order for the app to do anything that's not with the 4 countries on the list now, they would have to add another country. And like, that means the US would need to add the United States to its list of state-sponsored terrorists, which I don't think would.
So my recollection from the marshal, 2 things. One, I don't think that changes the Uyghur China problem that was mentioned before, that we could still do internal US counterterrorism things internally for other state-sponsored issues. But 2, I think that one of the counterterrorism policies we wanted people to have access to was adding people to that state-sponsored. Part of it, I agree with you, it solves the US concern. I don't think it solves the state sponsor of terrorism X is doing Y internally that the US can now go do things. Whether that's a good or bad addition to the top.
When you say people referring to countries, right?
It seems like the place to push on that is probably just counterterrorism policies. Like, is there a more specific phrase you came about in the literature that would either limit it to sanctions or limit it to just some sort of military or police action? It seems like that's how we deal with this. But I think it changes that, right? Yeah.
In the Marshall, when we discussed this, counterterrorism was by far the most limiting and well-defined option available. It includes, I think it was like surveillance, direct military action, and limiting foreign financing.
Okay, so just 3 mechanisms that the app can choose.
That was one of them.
Yeah.
There were definitely other ones that brought into that.
And one of the things when a nation is defined as a state sponsored of terror, there's 4 things that then come into play. And the 4th one actually has several subpoints, and that is related to finances.
Okay.
So where should international go?
I think it does need to go. Tommy, so let's get out there.
Counterterrorism policy is gigantic. I think it would need to be a limiter like operations or counterterrorism assistance or these counterterrorism policies. There's literature that includes things like humanitarian aid, things like refugee response. Whereas, there are several other terms that can be used with counterterrorism to kind of keep that more clean and narrow. But again, it goes back to the Department of State versus DoD question. Counterterrorism operations, DoD thing, military focus, not necessarily related to the state sponsor of terrorism. The Department of State more focused on the state sponsor of terrorism, but does more non-military assistance, sanctions, that type of thing.
I think depending on where you put international, it's going to change the focus a little bit. If you leave if you put it first where it's international counterterrorism policies, it means the policies have to be international. If you put it second to combat international state-sponsored terrorism, it means the terrorism needs to be international. So which one makes the most sense?
International.
You want both?
Well, the argument was made that if you capitalize state sponsor.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't capitalize. Do we need it? Like, it's not like we have a lot of state-sponsored terrorism here, right?
Right.
So do we need international at all?
Well, we have domestic terrorism, but it's not state sponsored.
Sponsored, yeah.
It's just not state sponsored.
The definition of that, and admittedly, this is the source that begins with W and ends with Wikipedia. Is a state-sponsored terrorism is terrorist violence carried out with the active support of national governments provided to violent non-state actors.
Yeah, the Department of State has a very clear state sponsor of terrorism definition, in which the state lists a country that that meets certain criteria as providing consistent international support. Like, it's very, I've got several cards, and it's very well defined of what a state sponsored terrorism, assuming that it is capitalized. If we capitalize it, international support is not necessary.
Dr. Edwards.
Yeah, I think what Darren is reading is the generic definition of state-sponsored terrorism, which is not necessarily the U.S. State Department list of state sponsors of terrorism. So if we use the very specific term that the State Department uses, which is state sponsors of terrorism, it would be capitalized and it would refer to the four countries. But in my opinion, if you don't capitalize it and if you list it like this, you know, it would be a definitional argument. I mean, if I'm negative, I could argue that that's a reference to the State Department list, but I think not necessarily so. Unless it is capitalized and it says state
Yeah.
sponsors of
Of
terrorism.
terrorism.
Especially since in the Marshall, there was discussion about international interpretations of whether the US State Department state sponsors of terrorism list is a good list or not. And maybe I would like to see this resolution be worded in such a way, wherever we put international, that we could consider changing the countries on the list or designating different countries as being state sponsors of terror. Because I think that's where the really interesting international
I
debate
think
is.
strengthening it would allow you to mess with the criteria.
Yeah, if you limit it to the four, then it becomes a really narrow topic. Because there are those who will argue that actually certainly Cuba, a lot of question about whether they should really be on this. There's actually also some who question whether North Korea should be on the list.
From the Marshall Committee, part of the reason some people were advocating adding international was to prevent the topic from becoming the United States checking its own terrorism against indigenous peoples in methods of policing, et cetera. We'll just add that context.
Procedurally, how about, here's a suggestion. We vote this down. So we don't have the international there, but then we do another amendment saying capitalize state, capitalize sponsors, use of terrorism. Because the Department of State identifies it as countries determined by the Secretary of State. So that might solve the issue. I don't know.
So I like the fact that that has definitional clarity, but it's not really, I think that means that the action has to be directed towards only the state that is sponsoring the terrorism, which I don't think really is supported by the paper or any of the evidence in the paper. So that could be.
I see that.
So,
but let's vote this down then, if you want to. Get rid of this off the table.
This allows that, but doesn't require it. And I'm really with Tommy on so maybe we should handle this, but I do kind of want to go back to the question of counterterrorism. What?
Yeah, but do we need the international anywhere?
Yeah, I think it should be the purple one, personally.
I agree.
So let's vote on this and then we'll get to the other issues.
It seems like a really minuscule difference. I don't
Yeah.
think it actually impacts it that much.
I would agree. So let's take out the red one and use the purple and then vote on it.
So is there a motion to remove the red one and keep the?
I do.
purple one? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of removing the red to keep the purple? Okay, let's do that. Is there a motion to accept the purple? Is there a second? Yes. All those in favor of keeping the purple?
Wait, well, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Like that, this isn't accepting the resolution. This is.
No, not
Yes.
accept the resolution. Just
Yeah.
leave international in there.
International.
Now we can argue about the others.
Okay,
But
so
at least now we're clean.
Is there a motion to capitalize state sponsored of terrorism?
No.
I kind of agree with Brett. I don't think that gets us
I think it makes it
past
too
the main
small.
thing.
Okay.
I don't know if it's too small because I think policies that are combating North Korea or Iran or Syria are all big, but I think there are a lot of policies
Yeah.
that could be combating those. Like, I think we need to think about this first part of the sentence first.
Can I speak on that question?
Yes.
Okay, so counterterrorism policies, I think that there are a couple of definitions that are very limited. Most of them do include some form of immigration assistance and humanitarian assistance to basically develop areas where terrorists would be less likely to be housed or be recruited in. And I think this for sure includes that. I don't think that the paper or the Marshall Committee vetted an alternative phrase, counterterror something. Options would be like counterterrorism sanctions, counterterrorism operations. And that might be a place to come back to with Ev. But maybe just being big is what everybody wants. And
I don't really have a problem being big, given the fact that the number of countries is likely to be relatively small. I don't see a whole lot of additional, I mean, if we operate under the premise that there's four, there's some pretty substantial disagreement on at least one of them. And there's not a lot of evidence regarding adding others, then I think the fact that you've got a relatively small base of countries limits that enough that even if it says counterterrorism policies, I think there is good evidence that says operations have their place and that actually striking at the financial side of it also. And there was some evidence that I found that was specific to the big thing that state sponsors do is actually provide a lot of the finances that allows these terrorist groups to get the weapons and to get the training and to get that sort of stuff. So I think having both of those things in play, if this was a case where there were 40 nations involved, then yes, I would agree with Tommy. But given the small number of nations involved, I'm far less concerned about that than I would be otherwise.
Does the having policies in there with its counterterrorism policies limit you only to existing policies?
Seems like a good tea debate. Yeah.
And is that what we want? That's the question.
Yeah.
I would argue no, because if part of the counterterrorism policy is that we currently designate certain nations as state sponsors of terrorism, then strengthening that policy would be adding another nation to the list.
Like the subsets.
Yeah, if we were going from 0 nations designated to
So static.
nations designated, then maybe that strength and argument might be a little bit more compelling. At first thought, I don't find it as convincing in a world where there are nations that are currently designated as.
So I think adding international state-sponsored terrorism gets you out of China and the Uyghurs. I don't think it gets you out of Russia and Ukraine. And I don't think the wording of this resolution would require the State Department to add Russia to their state sponsor of terrorism list, because there are a lot of definitions that just say Russia is the state sponsor of terrorism by what they're doing in Ukraine. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm just wanting us to realize what we're doing.
I'm not fully convinced that, because if you look at, for example, Russia's use of the Wagner Group and Russia's support for the separatists in Donetsk, I think you can make the argument that those groups were engaging in activities that could be defined as terrorist in nature. And so I think that you get that connection. I think you at least, an app can at least make that argument and probably win it often enough that case would be viable.
The European Parliament in 2022 declared Russia to be a state sponsor of terrorism.
Yeah, there were several nations that did that, also independent.
I think we're sort of talking around it, but a question to pose to you. It seems like if we, replace state-sponsored terrorism with just like the official Department of State phrase, then any country that's not the 4 currently on it, the floor for the affirmative has to be adding that country to the list. So the neg for sure has that ground against we should not be adding the country to the list. Now that also means that it could exclude a bunch of actions if there's no solvency advocate for adding it to the list. So I think the question for you is just do you want to make that the floor for any country that's not currently on the list?
Restate it.
Yeah, sure. So if we replace international state-sponsored terrorism with the formal phrase state sponsors of terrorism, right? Then any affirmative seems like it would have to add a country to the list that's not currently on it if it wants to combat it. So this Russia thing, Russia has to be added first to then be combated. Is that the intention?
So no.
Okay.
I would say if you limit it to take out international and say combat state sponsors of terrorism, I think by that very nature, you then are limited to the 4 countries.
Wait, I don't.
Strengthening counterterrorism policies, combat state sponsors of terror or state sponsors of terrorism, because that phrase is used by the State Department, you are referring to a specific group of countries.
That's true, but why wouldn't adding a country also strengthen its counterterrorism policies? I mean, it seems like a debate to have, kind of my point.
I think the question would be then again, how do you define strengthen? Does strengthen have to be,
Pre-existing.
in this case,
Sure.
it's
Because you're strengthening
the
policies,
list. You're not,
the list.
yeah, you're strengthening the policy, you're strengthening the list, you're not strengthening the policy.
Not make it combat state sponsors of terrorism, because then you could launch a military strike against Russia because we consider them a state sponsor of terrorism, just to drive them out of Ukraine. You would then be opposing the country as opposing their state sponsorship of terrorism. We could attack North Korea because they are a state sponsor of terrorism, just because they are a threat to South Korea, not because we want to stop them from being terrorists.
I wouldn't want to be that affirmative.
Can we do that now?
Okay, we're at a minute 35.
Kaz had a hand up.
I'm beginning to wonder if we want to make it the official formal list. I mean, maybe the author does, but I'm not sure I want to limit the debate to the existing 4 countries that are designated as state sponsors
I
of
don't
terror.
either. I think that debate in a world where, as I said, there's substantial disagreement about the degree to which at least 2 of those nations. I think everybody pretty much agrees Iran, Syria, yes. The consensus of the evidence on Cuba seems to be no, and the DPRK is.
Tommy, quickly.
I mean, I think if that's the case, we should just remove the state sponsor of terrorism because of just how well defined that is, and that refers to a very specific thing within the counterterrorism stuff.
No, internet, if you were to leave it at like international terrorism, that just becomes a massive topic. And I'm not sure what the stable ground is on it. And I know that one of the things that Maggie was asking about was finding something about the trade-off between international terrorism combating and domestic terrorism combating. And I found some stuff that sort of implied that.
Yeah, that was just
I'm
what
not
you said
found.
was a core dissent. So I
Yeah,
just wanna
I'm
make
not,
sure that
yeah,
is-
I've not found the golden card, but what I have found in searching for this is actually some stuff that talks about competition against near peer states. And the evidence on that says we're focusing on counterterrorism, that you end up shifting your focus away from going against near peer states. That evidence does seem to be there, and it does seem to be pretty explicit.
Okay, time has expired, so I either need a motion to extend or to accept.
Motion to extend 2 minutes.
Second. Okay, extend for
I'm not
2
supposed
minutes.
to be up till 1. Yeah.
Okay, I still feel like counterterrorism policies is big. I don't think we've vetted other words. And so that's kind of where I'm at on accepting it as is, but I don't know what the solution is there.
At least with this wording, you have the stable negative ground that if the affirmative takes this action, they have defined Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, which then brings in the whole sanctions and the whole deal so I think you still have that negative ground with that wording.
Yeah, it's reasonable.
And there is some case evidence on, and coming from people like Brookings Institute, that we should not designate Russia's. And so that definitely is at least probably within the center of the body politic, something that isn't.
Yeah, I bet there's trigger for war kind of evidence if the United States were to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism.
Okay, 2 minutes has elapsed. Can I have a motion, please?
Okay.
Do you need a minute?
No, I think I'm good.
I think we're at that point. That's kind of.
Yeah.
Second.
Second.
Okay, there is a motion that has been seconded on the floor to accept the United States federal government should substantially strengthen its counterterrorism policies to combat international state-sponsored terrorism. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Congratulations.
Can I do one house something before we move on? Can we make the title match the topic and eliminate the space in counterterrorism?
Sure.
Thank you.
Rory.
That's our last one.
So we go back to some.
Yeah.
And so far, done before lunch and do callbacks right after lunch would be good.
Definitely know that got some of these callbacks.
Hi there. So discussions from our Marshall subcommittee focused on 2 areas. A little bit about the wording or the phrasing of climate migrants, just a little bit. And then we ended up going with established a foreign policy. There was some discussion about
the phrase climate mobility policy. We ended up going with this little more encompassing term. Those were the two kind of key issues, I guess. But yeah, the idea of like needing a policy, the creation, enhancement, whatever of a policy seemed to be crucial. So that was a key feature of the marshals.
Jen. So one of the things from the marshal that we just ran out of time on was protection of climate migrants. Did you that phrase? Is there a better phrase we could put at the very end?
I do think that you're talking about the word protection.
Yeah, or just like the last 5 words.
Okay, so I do think that the two that we were oscillating between was support or protection. I do think protection is the better word in the literature base. It seemed like the only other non-clunky alternative to climate migrants was climate refugees. The discussion, the research is divided. The research, I say it's not divided. It's not necessarily divided. The issue is that climate refugees as a legal distinction does not exist. There's no legal protection for it. Now, whether or not that like may be a good, like changing it to that and then allowing that argument to be made is a potential like discussion, I guess. There's significant evidence that says we should stop referring to them as climate refugees because doing so creates the illusion of protection. Or implies that it exists, which is the reason why the paper went away from that. I could see the arguments though for, I don't know, basically allowing those arguments to happen in a debate. I don't know.
So in the paper, I thought that there was a really clear distinction between like climate policy is different from migrant policy.
Yeah.
I'm a little worried that this wording, and I have not vetted the terms, but it seems like an international climate agreement would increase protection of climate migrants. Is that the
mitigation in the US, like a big,
yeah,
big carbon tax?
So
Increasing protection of migrants.
well, I don't think that would be establishing a foreign policy.
Oh, yeah.
But some international climate mitigation effort ostensibly seems topical. Did you find a way to limit that out with this phrasing, or is that an intention to include it in the?
So I don't think it's the intention to include it. I think you are correct that this iteration would include it. It seemed like the alternative was the instead of a foreign, it would be a climate mobility policy. There was some mixed discussion in the marshal about whether or not that was a good alternative.
Climate
mobility.
There's like a particular RAND article that
Yes.
discusses it, defines it in a few different ways. If you just Google that phrase in quotes, you'll find it.
Yeah, it'll be like, it should be the first.
Yeah.
I think we asked about this yesterday, but I don't know where the marshal landed on this. Protection of climate migrants, do they have to have already migrated?
You know, so there's some evidence, again, more so in the context of a climate mobility policy, there's some evidence that is like allows for the prevention or allows for like, in other words, you can do the policy before the migration has occurred.
I was just wondering, because protection of climate migrants seems like the noun is migrant, and so it's someone who has moved, whereas protection like against climate migration or something.
I do think
would
the
be-
term can't, like, there are some interpretations of the term climate migrant holistically or as a term that would allow for the interpretation to say, like, allow for the potential. And in other words, not like be realized. Certainly if you define climate and then define migrant, yes.
Is there a part on that topic, right?
I don't know if it's in the
No worries.
paper.
Okay, yeah, I'll just go. Thank
Is the intention of the topic that the United States admits more climate migrants, or that it both admits and establishes extraterritorial like situations where there are, I don't know, camps, resources, building things, but
I don't know that it is the, like, that's the only ask. I think that is an affirmative, granting some sort of temporary protective status or, you know, certainly I could see an argument for fixing the issue with the phrase climate refugee, essentially providing that sort of legal protection. I don't think that's the only affirmative, no.
The reason I'm asking is because I'm wondering if, and I know this limits the topic and messes it up in different ways, but substantially increase its policies to admit climate migrants or ways to, something around the more specifically describing what those things look like towards climate migrants solve some of the problems people are having here, because the ambiguity of protection, possibly including things that 5 steps down the road protect people. Right.
I would, my thought after kind of hearing the suggestion is it does feel to be extremely limiting. It seems to be that it is one arc. There were several instances of like different types of actions that could be taken. And I think if it's just dealing with admittance, then to me, there's not a lot of variety for the act.
Dr. Edwards.
Well, I'm just seeing a lot of definitions of climate mobility, not one or two. Like there's an EU document where in their official glossary, it says climate mobility refers to different kinds of migratory movements, whether voluntary or forced, temporary, long-term, therefore encompasses a wide spectrum of mobility outcomes. So I see that term used quite a bit. It's not just in a couple of places.
Yeah, I think climate mobility policy was the specific term of art that was discussed for instead of different.
In the roundtable, the discussion of what negative ground was for this topic was that the app had to be adaptation. So the neg could say mitigation or counterplan or trade-off PA. This resolution, since it now includes mitigation, I'm wondering if there's a way to.
I would love a wording that would prevent.
Okay, so then can you fill us in a little bit on why we got rid of climate mobility policy? Because it was my favorite by far.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly also agree. It just seemed like the direction and the discussion and the marshals was that there wasn't enough like discussion of that phrasing. I also potentially agree with you.
A little bit out on a limb here. Would you be at all amenable to just like a more generic climate topic? 'Cause I think I would feel more comfortable with that than with some of these phrases that I'm less confident in.
I mean, I would love a climate. I mean, it is a kind of big departure. I'm not opposed to a climate topic.
Can I suggest then a wording? Or does someone, Bricker, what was your wording?
Oh, well, I love the idea of a bigger climate topic, but if for this one, should establish a climate mobility policy to substantially increase its protection of climate migrants.
Negative.
What?
That gives big climate to the negative.
Right, yeah, I think that more clearly ensures, and I agree with both of what have been said, which is climate mobility policy is only defined in RAND, but climate mobility has enough other definitions that I feel like you could get at it to create some limits.
Correct.
I still.
Is there a motion to change the wording?
I want it to be generic climate.
Okay, so my motion,
Alchemist
which I think is
paper
different
doesn't
than
support
Lauren's,
We have past papers that do support it. Then
Yeah.
you can't tell me you're more.
So some context from Marshall, which is to add. So I think it was just mostly a time thing because it's like the very end of it. But when it got swapped from climate mobility policy to foreign policy, I think the concern was that a whole bunch of the climate mobility policies could be domestic, and we just need to figure out the right word. Now, foreign climate mobility policy might just be the right middle ground there. Like it seems like a pretty common word that means something that people understand, and climate mobility has a bunch of definitions. So I don't know if we need all 4 of those words together to have a clear definition would be nice, but I do think there's probably enough clarity around it. We just made that change.
So your recommendation is to add climate mobility in between foreign and policy.
As a start, and then we can decide if we want to keep foreign or lose foreign, but I think that's just like the
Is
first.
there a second?
Sorry, I missed that. What?
We're just gonna
We're
add climate.
discussing adding climate mobility in between foreign and policy. Dr. Edwards.
The side discussion that I was having with Lauren, I think this does become a big climate topic in a good, interesting way. Because the problem you generally have with a big climate topic is what's the negative. Here you put the affirmative on the path of dealing with this particular and serious adaptation issue, which gives to the negative. No, we need to slow it, we need to solve it, we need to cure it. So I think it provides a big climate discussion.
Gives all the mitigation to the negative.
What's the net benefit to that kind of person? Like, what's the disadvantage to protecting climate?
Well,
I understand that the negative gets to say we should adapt instead, but what's the reason to not do both, I guess?
I'd have to think about it, but
Yeah, I just don't know what the TA is for that trade-off. Like, I don't think there's a good trade-off between the two.
I think it requires a little more work on the protection piece, which I'm about to
Oh,
talk
great.
about.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm sorry, I'm just missing, what is the objection to a more generic climate topic other than concerns about neg ground? Which I think is a smaller issue than a topic about climate migrants, which I think has less negative ground.
The
Procedural.
paper doesn't
Yeah.
address.
Okay, but we have like, what, a 50-page paper from 2 years ago that supports it?
That's not this paper.
Yeah, but
And but we've made radical departures before. I'm much more comfortable with a general climate topic than I am with one about climate migrants where I have substantial concerns about negative ground. I mean, what is the neg to don't help the people affected by climate change? Because I don't know.
And one more thing to add for Marshall, which I want Rory's take on.
Yeah.
We were talking about rights-based protection or legal protection as that last phrase, as a modifier for climate mobility. What are your thoughts on it like a day later?
Like to add like.
That was one of the things we let on,
protection.
right? Because the reason it became protection, because we were talking about rights-based or legal approaches,
right.
right? That's why protection ended up being the word.
It's even better than support. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the reason. What are your thoughts on making it like legal protection of climate migrants? Because then there is a neg, because then you can say legal protection approach is bad as a thing the neg says.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think that's a great idea. I mean, it's a smaller, it feels like there are less
Right.
options for the app. I don't think that's a horrible thing, only because I believe the app can still target specific areas, which would give them a little bit more variety in terms of the app. The mechanism, the plan becomes a little bit more singular, or not singular, but less multidimensional.
I will say if we go for that, I'm gonna say callback because I think we need like an hour to just like vet the
Sure.
combination of terms, but okay.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Going back to the amendment that we're working on right now,
Climate mobility.
on climate mobility, I think that's really, first of all, clunky, and it separating foreign policy,
I agree.
which is a term of art, obviously, into foreign and policy. It seems like establish an odd policy on climate mobility. I'm not in favor of splitting foreign and policy if we can find another way to do it, but going back, let's get this out of the way and then we'll go to the other issues.
Yeah, what I think so I think for Marshall, I think the thing we would probably want to do is, I agree it's clunky, would be add it in, chop off foreign, figure out the other way to make it an international topic. Because I think the thing is we don't want to support
That's not.
people moving around in California or Florida, right? Like lots of literature for those.
You're gonna amend the amendment?
Yeah, or international.
Lop off foreign.
Oh, sorry. I was seeing the same thing you're seeing, and a friendly amendment would just be to exclude climate mobility before the word foreign.
Just have
Mobility,
climate
foreign
mobility
policy.
I think climate mobility policy is the term of art, is the thing. So I think it's just strike foreign and figure out another way to make it international. But I was just gonna first do this.
Yeah, like
and
we
then
could,
strike
like
foreign.
once we move it, we could probably just move it to like international.
International climate migrants or something.
So let's
Okay, so
take,
let's
that's
deal with
what
this.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
how about a friendly amendment to strike foreign
Sure.
along with adding climate policy?
Yeah. Second.
Would that work?
Yeah.
And then let's
Second.
vote on this and then we'll get on to the other issues.
Yeah. Second.
I just want to flag that foreign climate mobility policy.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Climate mobility policy is a thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Right.
so,
How about-
so let's vote on
Okay,
this and then we can go to the other issues.
Agreed.
Okay.
So-
So there's a motion and a second on the floor to deal with eliminating foreign and adding climate mobility to the wording as is. All those in favor? Any opposition? Okay, please make those changes. Or
Now we can move on with others.
A more general climate topic allows you to read an F about climate migrants while still accessing more diverse affirmatives and better negative ground.
I agree. I think that the
I think
problem that
Ricker
we're
should, because he wrote a long paper on this and he knows more about it than anyone in the room.
right.
wrote it-
I
I
think
wrote-
the issue at hand, though, is that the paper that we're looking at doesn't.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be overly concerned about fidelity to a paper when we have a defense because we have a good paper that was written on this a couple of years ago.
But that's
If
not
our
the paper
concern-
that's in front
But
of
I don't
us.
care. Like, I want the
But
best
that's out of
topic
order.
possible.
I agree. I understand, but that's,
The concerns about the topic should outweigh fidelity to the paper.
can I have some support here?
Agreed. Yeah. I'm certainly not gonna vote in favor of this, so whatever.
Yeah.
I don't want to overrule you. I
Agreed.
okay, I think that there has to
Yeah.
be,
Agreed.
I
I'll
think
go
that
ahead
there
and
has to be
say
some
I-
fidelity to what we bring to the
I'll
table.
go ahead and say I move to add international ahead of the word climate.
We got quite a few hands up.
I want to hear from the maritime people on fidelity to the topic paper.
This was really about is it like, I think I'd be able to like the original office, but then the Marshall thing would also kind of say, so it's not just, I just don't think it makes sense to kind of put that all over the word.
Can I respond to that? If
Is there something that goes kind of hand in hand with climate migrants? I don't know a whole lot about it, but like the way that we have, navigation, they're two different things, but they do go together a lot, so it kind of broadens it. Is there anything similar? So like its protection of blank and or.
I mean, I don't think directly, I'd have to look, but, I don't think directly.
the lens that I think we should be framing this through is what is the best topic to our students and what is going to sustain a year of debates. To me, a larger climate topic accesses the climate migrant stuff, has a more robust negative ground, and concerns about fidelity to the paper, I think are just less relevant.
I agree with the sentiment, but I agree with your sentiment as someone who values procedure. I do think this is probably out of order. I do think there's a workaround after you get through this, entertain the motions or do this or put it in there and act it that way. I completely accept where this is coming from. But at that point, you do that, you do open the floor for like, I came up with a full motion. I thought I. So that's the problem.
I mean, I just want to say as an author, I think there's something with times that once you get here, it's not yours, right? And it can be emotionally draining to have it completely ripped apart and put back and the words change. As long as it is getting the objective, I feel like changing it for the students, for the overall debatability is something that as an author we have to accept. And so if your main purpose of getting recognition for climate migrants and students debating it will be achieved in changing it to something, broader and that will entice students more, I think that is what we kind of have to subject ourselves to as authors is once you get, you work on it, you're baby, but once you get here, it's gonna be changed. It just is.
Right,
As long
and
as.
I absolutely agree with you. Although the changes that Marshall makes and that committee people have made are still supported by the literature that as an author you have brought. And so the argument I think that we're having at this point is that there was a beautiful paper written on this 2 or 3 years ago, but that's not what Rory brought.
That, like, even after the Marshall committee, like, you're no longer an author, but everyone says like you're still like the topic expert, and people are sometimes like supposed to refer to you if they have a question. If you change the topic too radically, yes, it's really concerned about the students, but then some of that can be lost because you change drastically, then you lose the expectation.
I agree. Clint?
I mean, first, we're getting away from the topic, I just walked in, but if we can totally change what the author is writing about and go into like a general area, then why are we as the authors writing? Why don't we just throw out just a general area and then we can come to this meeting and then decide on the topic, right?
Okay, thank you.
Can I-
Time has expired on this, so I either need a motion to extend.
I would like to just move this into callbacks. I don't
Sure.
think this is a situation that's gonna be solved in the next 2 minutes.
I agree.
And so we can think about it over lunch, discuss it amongst ourselves, and possibly come back with, a more unified approach.
Okay,
So I would suggest moving it to callbacks.
Policies, one of them.
Okay, so Lauren and I advocated a substantial change from the climate mobility paper to be a more multilateral focused, broader climate mitigation paper. The committee at large decided that that was not the best approach for two reasons. One was a procedural reason. That approach would not have been embedded either in the paper or in the Marshall committee or in any real time, not much time dedicated to that subject. And one was substantive. So it was also rejected because the climate paper that was referenced was much more defense of a domestic climate topic than it was international climate topic. So there wasn't a readily available resolution option to shift towards. So like in full transparency, that's why we're moving forward with this as a climate mobility policy. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, thank you.
All right, so at this time, we would like to welcome back Maritime. Welcome back, Maritime.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Okay, so the whole thing with maritime versus admiralty versus law of the sea, we did deal with that whenever we were writing our paper. I think best bet is gonna be law of the sea. I'm not sure if that necessitates international. Just because we use the UN and we say it. But law of the sea uncapitalized is going to just be the term of art, law of the sea. Capitalized, it would refer to UNCLOS pretty consistently. Almost any time you have law and sea capitalized, it's going to bring up UNCLOS. But I think uncapitalized is sufficient because it'll give you both those legal definitions and UNCLOS, reference you to UNCLOS. So I think we can get rid of international because of the UN actor. And I think that does encompass what we want it to and what it needs to.
So your recommendation is to remove international?
Yes.
That doesn't state plural laws or single.
I would say law of the sea.
Just gonna get a motion on that, yes?
Well, okay, I'll make a motion that we accept it, but then I want to ask a question as soon as someone seconds. Okay, my question is, since law of the sea is the UNCLOS thing, and it seemed like when I was gazing through some of the literature earlier, that when we're talking about the laws of the sea in a lowercase sense, that there is more than one of them. So do you think that the word law encompasses the more than one of them when it's lowercase? Or do you think that the plural, I mean, you've done a lot more reading than me, so.
Yeah, I think it is just the law of the sea seems to be the more common term of art, but I don't think laws of the sea would be necessarily incorrect.
I think that's a very extreme or technical thing. Just like you said, law of the sea is just the more broadly accepted term that encompasses everything that we're kind of talking about here.
We are very technical. Dr. Edwards?
Oh, I wasn't necessarily seeking to be recognized, but I'm just looking at laws of the sea, International Seabed Authority, a dispute mechanism in the law of the sea, freedom of the high seas. So it is more than just UNCLOS, looks like.
So it's okay at law, it doesn't necessarily need to be laws.
What I found law of the sea does encompass it's like a group of treaties, geographic locations.
But are those United Nations laws of the sea? So there might be a number of different law of the sea agreements, treaties, etc. But would they be encompassed within this language?
Does it hold that?
Well, I think it's United Nations and it's is the reason for my question. Yeah. Right. So what I'm wondering is the majority of legal material treaties, laws, whatever, that create the general body of law of the sea. Is that properly termed, a United Nations law? Like, how much more United Nations law of the sea is there beyond UNCLOS?
There's a fair amount.
Can you identify?
High Seas Treaty, all of the ones that Kevin just, or Dr. Edwards, my God, Dr. Edwards just mentioned, those are all going to be, if they're referenced in UNCLOS, they're also, if they exist, they're also referenced in UNCLOS. Does that answer that?
Yeah,
Okay.
possibly.
I have a slightly different answer to your question, I think, or maybe coming at it from a different angle. So the law of the sea, the title is, what is the law of the sea? The law of the sea, ... There are many rules and customs involved, but in 1994, the UN condensed and codified these traditions into a single understanding titled UNCLOS. UNCLOS. It is intended to serve as an international law governing navigational rights, jurisdiction over coastal waters, ownership of natural resources, and then it distinguishes that from maritime law. So I think what the UN did in 1994 is they took all of the things that were underneath their different laws and put them in UNCLOS. I don't know if that answers your question of state governing laws that states have to govern outside of those laws themselves. I don't know that.
But yeah, I mean, the point of my question is really just to make sure that we're confident that United Nations law or laws of the sea encompasses enough of what constitutes that body.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Tim,
Brett, can I ask a question based on what you just said? Because like, what I imagine what you're saying though is capital law of the sea, right? Not lowercase. Because when I'm reading about lowercase law of the sea, it's mostly like domestic documents from the NOAA and stuff like that, not UN documents. Was the stuff you were reading from United Nations documents?
These are from like academic sources.
Okay.
But they do. So in the definition that I read of what the law of the sea addresses, ... The law of the sea addresses how countries interact with one another in maritime situations. That's lowercase.
Is that talking about the UN though, or is that talking about?
That's the one
Yeah.
I was referencing.
Okay.
Being stuck under the books. So, and I think most of the other definitions that I've found also use lowercase.
Yeah, anytime it's not dealing, or it's not referencing to people specifically, I think it is lowercase. Or at least high majority.
can we vote on this?
Sure.
Yeah, so there was a motion and a second to withdraw international and to add an S to laws of the sea. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, motion second. Whatever.
So can we vote on that, please? All those in favor? Okay, we make these changes. Yeah.
That's what happens when you don't have a mouse.
I think we voted to leave S on it.
Right, sorry.
Questions, comment? Can I have a motion from the committee?
Motion to accept.
There's a motion and a second to accept the wording as now. The United Nations should substantially strengthen its laws of the sea governing freedom of navigation and or exclusive economic zones. All those in favor? Opposed? Passes. Thank you very much. Transnational. Blah de blah.
I moved to add resolved colon.
Colin's got this drop.
I'm saying no, but like whenever residents say you have resolved colon.
I didn't think about that though.
Hello, blah, blah, blah.
I'd like to thank you to the Senate Select Committee on debate topic selection.
Just say I didn't do it.
I did not do it.
Plead the fifth.
I will not do it. Not because I can't do it, it's just because I'm lazy.
Thank you for.
Well, yeah.
So we had asked you to look into combating.
Okay, so I did a quick Google search. So I put interdiction efforts in countering transnational organized crime. I came up with about 109,000 Google results. Interdiction efforts combating comes up with about 208,000 results. So combating seems to be the predominant, I mean, like better result gatherer, Google wise, the Googler.
So ask you to look at drugs versus, no, I'm sorry, illicit drugs versus narcotics.
Illicit drug, this one's just almost depending on what you look at. The certain parts of the federal government says illicit drugs because it includes things like cocaine and marijuana. The DEA and Department of Homeland Security still use narcotics all over their website as in referring to their efforts to stop trade of drugs into the country. So I think that's, to me, that's, I don't, it's neither here nor there for me.
I kind of wonder why we don't just do drugs, like prescription drug trade is also a thing, right? It's probably the same things anyway. Seems like we might as well just avoid this entirely. Just have the overall thing, just say drugs.
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
Can we bracket illicit?
Yeah, I mean, illicit is not absolutely necessary there. I thought narcotics was too narrow since there are quite a few definitions of narcotics that don't include other drugs that we might want to control, like ketamine and things like that. And I think narcotics are a subset of the illicit drugs. They're not the set of.
Agree. This just seems like a silly topicality debate to have.
Yeah.
We can just avoid it by just saying drugs.
That's fine,
Yeah.
because if the criminals want to traffic in
Like prescription drugs.
prescription
Right.
drugs, insulins, weight loss drugs, whatever it is.
Take goes in.
Take Ozempic. Yeah, there's plenty of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
was a big thing earlier this year.
I think that just drugs would be better than the narcotics, and we can skip
I agree.
illicit.
Agreed.
Agree.
A motion to remove illicit. Or before that, TFs.
I was just gonna say, are you gonna help with this?
Once
Yes.
we've got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a motion to eliminate illicit. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor of eliminating illicit? Okay, please make that happen.
And then we have to
Read
vote on
alphabetical.
drugs versus narcotics. Do we have to vote on that?
I thought we already.
We already did. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So our Marshall subcommittee did not vet this term cybercrime. It was added after at least most of us left the room. My reading of the paper, there's a line. I mean, there's only definitions of what cybercrime is. I have two thoughts though. One is that the paper says the primary effect of cybercrime is financial. So I'm not sure how it's distinct enough from financial crimes according to the author. And then second, interdiction efforts and drugs. There's a lot of context for like, we interdict drugs. There's a lot of interdiction when it comes to financial crimes. The interdiction of cyber crimes though, seems to like fall off. Just based on like finding the solvency advocate or like, I don't think we interdict cyber crimes. I think we use a different verb in those matters. So I'm wondering like, one, are cyber crimes not financial crimes? And then two, are we concerned that interdiction in cyber crimes is not in the literature?
I echo the same concerns. I'm pretty sure with respect to interdiction, I have the same read as Jeff, just doing some research over the last couple hours, that I think the interdiction of financial crimes includes a bunch of cyber modalities to be able to fight them. I'm curious what apps you think might get excluded, though, Clint, I want to make sure your intent's captured.
Okay, so like, on the base level, cyber crimes also can include things like, not just ransomware attacks, but can also include like identity theft, things like that go beyond just the financial crime. Totally crashing of systems, things like that. Yeah, I can see where it could hook into the financial crimes area.
Well, identity theft is like financial fraud, though, right? Like there would be a lot of SEC stuff covering identity theft and identity fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So would you like drugs and or financial crimes?
that's what I'm thinking about if there isn't big opposition.
Are you able to that? May I have a motion to do that?
Yeah.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, just strike out cyber crimes because I'm pretty sure all the cyber stuff that's interdiction is financial. I think Jeff's right.
So we would like to see drugs and or financial crimes.
Yes.
And then take the,
We might need to do a little bit more workshopping around financial crimes, but I think that's the right direction. But there's a hand back there.
yes, hand back there.
I mean, this is, I'm sorry if I did, are you wanting to inform?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, motion for the
Okay.
current changes.
I have so we've said transnational organized crime in drugs and or should it be financial?
I think that's next. Let's get this one, like
Okay.
strike cybercrime first and then, yeah.
All right, yeah, but that doesn't do that. All right, so can we vote on eliminating the colon and cyber crimes and then adding and or between drugs and financial crimes?
Yeah. Did we get a motion in a second already?
I'll motion.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there discussion on that? Shall we vote on that? All those in favor? Okay, please make those changes. Lauren, what was the next change? And Danville, what was the next change? Sorry.
We need to figure out this financial crimes part, if we still need crimes twice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Strengthen its international interdiction efforts combating transnational organized crime in drugs and or financial. I don't think it needs crimes again, but it needs financial.
It needs something.
This meeting is working.
What if drugs went after transnational
Trafficking, drug.
or trafficking? Yeah.
In drug trafficking?
Yeah, I'll motion for trafficking.
Drug
Okay.
trafficking and financial crimes.
There,
I think they except by just saying combating transnational organized drug and for financial crimes. Because then.
There we go.
crime would like a whole drug crime.
okay, wait, that was good. Say that again.
Hold on.
I don't know
Say
that.
Combating transnational organized drug and for financial. crimes.
Okay, yes.
But transnational organized crime is the term of
Yeah,
art.
that's,
And
yeah, I don't want to
splitting
split the term of art. Yeah,
Splitting the term of art to make it make sense.
yeah.
We're splitting what?
The term of art. The term of art is transnational organized crime.
I love
I
it.
think trafficking is good after drugs.
Traffic, yeah, if you.
I think drug trafficking and or financial crimes.
And or financial crimes would solve the.
Drug trafficking is obviously
Why
a
are we
crazy.
limiting it for trafficking? For drugs, they're non-trafficking.
Make prescriptions?
I'm not thinking about things like international interdiction efforts that like burn down crops. That's not a trafficking issue, that's a production issue.
It's true.
I was concerned that drug trafficking didn't include prescription drugs. But but there's a.
Trafficking.
With the term in this way, like exclude things, for example, stealing from.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
So if we write in just not included, that exclude like.
I don't think it excludes counterfeiting, but I am more worried about Sarah's question about if there are other parts of the drug pipeline that are worth discussing that we do exclude. But I don't think it excludes like types of drugs.
So I don't think trafficking is the term, but what is?
I think it could be depending on what combating transnational organized crime in the area means. Like if you're combating transnational organized crime, could you affect any part of
If
that?
if you're interdicting to combat the crime, you could burn the crops.
Correct.
To prevent the
trafficking. Correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so along those lines, like the searching for international drug interdiction efforts, there's lots of things like destroying machines, destroying molds that make pills that then are counterfeit that have fentanyl in them and stuff. Like, I think we would be inadvertently excluding a really interesting part of that.
Okay, with trafficking.
Are you finding any terms that are not trafficking though? Because that's where I'm getting stuck.
I'm looking still. Did I guess?
Drug trafficking seems to be defined as, at least according to two sources, the global illicit trade involving the cultivation, manufacture, distribution, and sale of substances. It's a UN document.
I would also be fine with just saying that the scope of the drug trafficking is a T question, as long as we have some evidence that's decently qualified that it could be either big or small, and leave it up to the debaters, because then at least it's not excluding entirely. I don't know a better phrase. I couldn't find one earlier or now, so.
That's interesting.
But I agree. I think it doesn't end everything.
Yes.
Based on this article I'm reading that like reviews what our interdiction activities are for drug trafficking, it includes things like programs and efforts undertaken in and with the drug producing countries. So like in a country to reduce the production and availability of drugs, international traffic, and then domestic distribution. Seems like all being included. If we use the term trafficking. So
That's drug trafficking, right? Like no
it
as
is drug
trafficking.
Yeah, I don't think it limits out anything that we really want to deal with. But it just seems more eloquent.
It seems at worst it's a T debate,
Does
which
that
I'm
answer your concern?
Not quite, just because most of what I'm looking at says trafficking and then has like a clause like also efforts that do these other things, which I admit it's not definitive, but it leads me to believe that the trafficking focus is distinct from some of the other things.
Yeah, I think so.
So my concern with just saying drugs, is because you're bringing in the pharmaceutical industry. That is a huge topic on its own, but it seems like to me you're wanting to focus not quite on the pharmaceutical industry, but illegal drugs. So can you not say like illicit pharmaceutical drugs? Because those are the ones that you're talking about that are being made into other drugs. I feel like it's a drug is just such a broad category.
Interdiction.
That even if you said illicit drugs, or, I mean, I'm like, bring in all of pharmaceutical drugs, which is what you would be bringing in saying drugs. It is so broad.
Lauren, I agree with what Demnell said. I spent a couple minutes looking into the phrase drug trafficking. There seems like there's some agreement about what it includes and some things up for debate. So I think it would be fair to make that a T debate for the students.
I think one of the things that solves the concern about bringing in all pharmaceuticals is you're dealing with transnational organized crime. So it would be only the pharmaceuticals that transnational organized crime is using for profits and all of that. So it's not all prescription drugs, but it is part of the illicit nature of the transnational organized crime. So you're only dealing with those that they're using to make profits.
Is there a motion?
Motion to change the phrase to drug trafficking, no S.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah, can we vote on that?
Sure.
All those in favor? Okay, please make that change. We're under 5 minutes.
I think the last piece, obviously disagreed, they missing something. I think the last piece we need to vet here is just the financial crimes as wording. It seems correct to me. Does
Mhm.
anyone disagree?
The only question was the double crime, but I think transnational organized crime is the term of art.
Right.
And what is it but a financial crime? You're not looking into all financials. There aren't a specific category of financials that you're looking into, except if they use the if it's criminal activity.
And financial crimes is the thing like the SEC and everything.
And that's a term of
defines. Exactly. Yeah.
And there is some overlap in the drug trafficking and other
And-
financial
yes.
crimes as well.
Like I think we definitely need the and or for this
Yeah.
topic.
No, I think that's good. I'll move to accept.
I'll second. Any other discussion? Okay, we have a movement and a second to adopt as the United States federal government should significantly strengthen its international interdiction efforts combating transnational organized crime in drug trafficking and or financial crimes. All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Alvin. Like a triple back,
Triple back somersault. Okay.
yes, to dismount.
Okay.
What do we have?
What's up next?
Started with,
What's up next?
Climate.
Climate.
Yeah.
Rory. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Okay, okay, so yeah, I think we moved forward on climate mobility policy. The more that I've looked at it, and found both climate mobility and climate mobility policy in literature, leads me to think that this is the way we should go, that if it's too general or a foreign policy or something, anything like that, any just blank, it's too narrow. This gives it at least a little bit more literature base, which I think is good. We need to get international in there. And I also think that maybe we need to relook at the word protection. I am inclined to change it back to support and add international before climate.
You establish an international
You know, sorry, add international for the second climate.
International
protection
climate.
of international climate. Got it.
I moved for that part, the adding the international before climate. Let's just get that one out of the way first.
Second.
There's a movement and a second to add international right there to increase its protection of international climate migrant. Yes.
Just confirming that, like, we're looking at migrants specifically who are going to other countries.
No, it would, their climate
not
migrants
US.
would refer to people who are migrating to other countries for sure, but also within if need be.
I wonder if international presence for climate migrants kind of marks.
I mean, I don't think that it is a bad, I mean, I think it is, if I'm envisioning debates, like I would envision to talk about people who are having to leave their whole country. I'm just saying like which I think is why we do want international there, although technically climate migrants can be people who are there. I think for our purposes, as long as we're talking about people not in the United States, then we're good. So even if they're migrating within their own country, I still feel like that is okay with regards to the topics.
Yes, sir.
I guess it's not great adherence. Is that something we do right now to protect the international migrants?
Yeah, I mean, like there's some like momentum in the government. There's a lot of talk, a lot of action as to I think most things are. Biden issued an executive order in 2021. There was some framework that was discussed. A lot of it was just words, you know. It's certainly not a pressing political issue. here in the United States, especially because the focus or the locus seems to be on not American citizens. So it seems to not get seen. Yeah, there's a lot of good support for that. This is a growing, increasing problem and billions eventually.
Yes, sir.
Back to. This is like.
Yeah, I did. That's a good thought. I'm wondering actually if maybe we want it to be like international support of climate migrants. Yeah, I'm wondering if it's better to move it before than down. That's a good point. There's one more hand. I'm gonna remove my motion for that actually.
Could increase like support to the UN to help US people.
Seems fine. Like,
But is there any evidence that like an internally displaced person could also be considered a climate change? Because we're looking at climate migration, that's like
People here, international.
Um,
I understand.
Your
Like,
question
I'm just
is,
saying, I don't know if there's.
within the United States or just within our country?
within their own country, like in Africa, like IDPs are, like, that's a lot of their climate migrants.
Yeah.
So would this resolution, like, not include internally with them?
No, I think this resolution is.
Okay, is there literature to, like, is there overlap in this definition
Like of climate migrant or
of like
I-
a migrant versus an internally displaced?
so, and Cindy kind of talked to me over lunch about like possibly changing to climate displaced persons as opposed to climate migrant. What I kind of found is there tends to be a little bit more literature based for climate migrants than the phrase climate displaced persons. I also don't think the interpretations that I'm finding of climate migrant exclude those who have forced displacement, even if it's not to a new country or to a new. I think they're still included under climate migrant.
Okay, and then I guess kind of a reiteration, but an international support climate migrants, do you think would change that as like a term altogether?
It's possible. I think the cleaner way might actually just be international support or international protection.
Okay.
Yeah. So I might just disregard my motion or just move it earlier. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Move
We move
to international before protection.
Mhm.
Before climate migrants.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like more, it seems like it's interchangeable, but I think that may be the better, that's what we want.
Yeah, exactly.
That is, that it to be outside of the US.
Yeah.
That's also.
Is preclude, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Does it preclude raising the like visa allowances for potential migrants to live in the US?
I don't think it would preclude that, no.
Why is that an international protection?
I'm gonna move to change protection next. I think it's just moving the international.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
So are we changing protection?
Yeah. Right.
Okay,
after
so
this.
let's vote on international. There's a,
Motion.
what's a
second.
motion?
Yeah,
Was there a second?
Standard.
And a second.
Yeah.
To add international after its for protection. All those in favor? Okay, please make that change. Denville, the
Yeah.
second change.
So I think support is the right word here. We were talking about this at lunch. The reasoning is like there are 5 areas of climate mobility policy.
Yeah.
Social protection is one of them, and it's like by far the worst area. I definitely don't think protection is the right word. Support seems general enough. It means like some form of foreign assistance happens, but doesn't preclude any of those areas. I think the effect that gets us is like the neg gets mitigation, the app is some form of climate adaptation. There has to be some targeted like climate displaced people. We can talk about that phrase next. I think support gets us closer enough to where we want to go. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think like part of the reason that protection we even leaned towards it was to allow for like any sort of asylum changes or TPS status. I think that also is included with support, especially for the interpretation of the climate mobility policy. I agree.
I think that international support does not include allowing migrants to live in the United States, taking migrants here, which that is a half of the paper. That it seems like you wanted that to be included in your paper.
I think it should be an option.
And
Yeah.
I think it's probably the more controversial area as well, like one that I think could produce better debates. I think that this is more representative of foreign assistance than it is of relocation to the US.
That's fair. What do you think is a word that could? I've been trying to figure it out.
Okay, I didn't know that.
No, that's fair.
I think if I'm interpreting it right, I don't know. It seems like you think maybe international should go back to before climate.
I do think that part of the problem is the fact that international is modifying protection and support, because I think you could do protection or support by allowing admittance. So yes, I think that confirms that.
And
that
what
it's
you want to
the-
modify is that the international should be modifying the climate migrants because it's the international migrants that we're talking about. Or that we want to talk about.
And not that I think it has to be a term, but I do think the term international climate migrants does exist in various places in the literature.
Devin, why did you like? Sorry.
No, you're, yeah.
Why did you like the international and the other thought?
Because climate migrants exists more as a phrase. International climate migrants does exist. It's just climate migrants as a phrase is a clearer term of art. And I liked the other spot just because it felt easier to say that the action has to be international in some form. But I agree, if we want to allow immigration protections, then no, should be the other spot.
Joe?
Right, they get looking at the White House climate migration policy paper. And it said multiple U.S. government agencies, including the Department of State, the Department of Defense, the Department of Agriculture, and U.S. State address climate-related migration through a mix of development and humanitarian assistance programs. So it seems, and since it's under U.S. forward assistance, that's probably going to be the literature based.
I mean, I think that is, and I mean, I do think that's an avenue of provide, like a potential of a way to do foreign.
To not the United States, and it cuts off the within the border of one country that's not the United States, so is that international law?
To me, that's just an option. It's an option for the app if they do want to provide some sort of international aid as a form of support. But I also think they would still be allowed to like adjust like immigration policies in the United States.
Sarah?
I'm moving from this island over to the island nation. This island would fall under international for us, even if it's within their own borders.
Yeah.
I think that's the concern.
To me, the interpretation of climate migrant, whether or not international is before that as a whole, the phrase climate migrant, what does allow for internal moving within the country. I think the purpose of international is to prevent, not that those people don't deserve support, but people in like fire torn areas of the United States moving within the US. I think they are considered a climate migrant, but they would not be international.
Right, I understand.
Okay. I would say personally that I would say that seems like a decent tea debate if that's to be had. I don't think that it would be precluded based on the interpretations.
I'm a little worried about international protection if we leave international in front of the verb, and then go back to protection, because international protection at the very first top of the Google definition is protection granted by a government to someone who has left another country to escape being harmed.
It's gonna be one or the other.
Okay. All
That's why
right.
they're both.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll figure
Yeah, well.
Okay, so this has gotten messy, so
Yeah,
let's try to clean this up a little bit.
My motion is to move international in front of climate migrants instead of support.
Yes.
Seconded. Yeah.
Yes.
I misflipped on that.
Say that again.
To
Second one.
remove the first purple and go with the second purple.
Yeah, second. Let's do it. Yeah.
So
Oh.
a climate mobility policy to substantially increase its, we're looking at support of international climate
Well,
migrants.
so far it's support. We haven't voted on that one.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
yeah.
But let's do the international.
Okay, so we're dealing with international. So all in favor of moving or keeping the second international and getting rid of the first one? Okay. If you would please make that change.
Now we can vote on the next one.
All right, now we're back to protection or support.
It's a little bit broader, allows a little bit better scholarly access to options for the affirmative. I think it's a good idea.
With support.
With support.
Does that help? Yeah.
Do we think protection is like a question of solvency?
I think it ends up being either potentially a little bit more limiting. I think if your interpretation of protection deals with any sort of like TPS or asylum, I think it is that like maybe works better. To me, it's a little bit narrow. Our interpretation is that there are 5 avenues of support or avenues of action under a climate mobility policy. one of those specifically uses the word protection, the others do not. So we.
Yeah, I'm asking if, does the app have to win they solve in order to win that they are protection? Because the actions of the app are not increasing protection. So I am in agreement that we should swap protection and support, because support does not necessarily mean you have to win to solve in order to achieve.
That is part of my concern because I saw that debate on the water topic a million times. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I move we accept this wording.
Very well. Can we vote on accepting this wording of support to get rid of protection and add support?
Yes.
Okay, please make that change. So the resolution as it stands right now, the United States federal government should establish a climate mobility policy to substantially increase its support of international climate migrants.
Sorry, could I just hear that, because it was very soft spoken over there. What was the answer on solvency for the word support?
It was that if it was protection, there would be too much of a solvency mixed burden question. That's in order to be topical, you had to like prove your solvency. Support is an easier way to avoid that.
Is that versus the other direction, like if I'm offering you emotional support?
It might, I don't think that is codified very well in terms of what a climate mobility policy would be. So I think there's a functional limit that way as well.
I do want to go back to the international climate migrant thing. I know you guys just voted on it, I know that's moving, but whenever we look at climate migrants, it seems like a lot of the literature will say that it's within a state or across an international border. So by adding that specific of international climate migrants, it does seem like you would be excluding IDPs. And then there's also in Australia union treaty that said an international climate migrant is a bilateral agreement between two countries. So I just want to make sure that like that's okay, or that's your intent.
I think I'm okay with that. I would foresee that being some arguments of debate, but I do think that when I was again looking at the difference between migrant versus displaced person, or sorry, looking at what when you first, before international gets put in, the difference between the two, that like other iterations do allow for within a border. I think to me, the only thing the international does is make sure that the migrant is international.
This is silly. Just I think it's basic debate. A substantial increase in the change was on face in terms of significant prima facie case. Significant support for actual.
I mean, I think that depends on how much the app wants to do, which I think is the case for every topic. But I mean, given the fact that millions are at potential risk of soil erosions, whole nations, small island developing states, whole places being gone in future years, I think that affirmatives have good inroads to that.
Am I correct that the word international is designed to mean someone outside of the United States at this point?
That is certainly on.
Okay. So does it solve your question about IDPs if there's some version of like, we just say outside of the United States or something in that fashion we're not, like, the idea is we're not talking about people in Florida, right? We're not talking about
The
like,
idea, yeah.
the, coast of South Carolina. If that's the purpose, is there some other way to say international with just using like the words United States?
Why not foreign?
Foreign, yeah, that's what I was trying to come up with, or,
I think we did, but I don't know why.
not American. I don't know. I like, there's gotta be some way to say not American without having to say international.
I don't know about foreign. I'll check.
It's like the possible solution of climate migrants originating from outside the United States or something like that. I was playing around with foreign in my head too, and I think that gets a little tricky based on like, you could be a foreigner in the United States who was born outside of, doesn't have citizenship, but you're like internally moving or something anyway. But like climate migrants originating from outside of the United States, that seems to solve that. Because I agree, that was intention, I was sort of playing.
Oh. Outside the United States. I mean, I live in. Originating outside of the United States. It's from, means like where are they born that are originating? I think originating. Because international climate migrants might mean that they had to move across the border, and a lot of people are internally displaced.
Climate mobility is the, that policy allowed.
We want to allow that, but international climate migrants might limit that out.
I just don't think it's,
No, I'm just wondering if these domestic apps just get destroyed by states and politics and are wasting a bunch of time. Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, did I want people to talk about California or Florida? No, but if they do, I'm not mad at them.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Instead of saying climate mobility policy, put like climate mobility policy, because then it is.
That's what's the term of art.
Yes.
I'll be. Yes.
I do think, for the record, international climate migrants exist more than foreign climate migrants do exist in the literature. I do think you will find international climate migrants better. It seems like the question here is whether or not international climate migrants excludes internally displaced persons. I think there are two responses, either like AFs say they don't and negs say they do, and vice versa, and they have that debate, or like, I don't know, to me, it doesn't seem like an issue.
It seems like a reasonably good topicality debate.
Yeah.
Rory, like,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
I don't think that's a bad thing. I haven't looked at that term, so I should know.
I mean, I feel like that would address the issue of how you say. You're not. You are a resident in the United States.
I think the most thoughtful interpretations sort of use climate migrants as a term of art, and that international is a modifier to climate migrants as opposed to migrants. So I think that, I mean, I know that's not how everything is going to go down, but I do think that that is the best answer for these.
To approve this wording.
Which wording?
The one.
Top
the top
as
one.
is.
Top as is.
Wait, international hasn't been approved.
Well, it was already there.
Yeah, no, it was.
Oh, okay, cool.
There's a motion to accept as is. Is there a
Second.
second? Okay, there is a motion and a second to accept as written. The United States federal government should establish a climate mobility policy to substantially increase its support of international climate migrants. Now we vote. All those in favor? Okey doke. Thank you very much. Done. That, I am gonna let him take over.
Oh, yeah.
We have to get back. Or did we wanna?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
sorry. Is there any other business concerning wording?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I do. India topic, I think it's lacking consistency with some of the grammatical discussion we had otherwise. Also in conversation with the topic author, he wanted to reopen the conversation at the very end of this topic about the right phrasing around trade. So
Okay.
if he's amenable, it would be great to just call him up quickly.
Sorry, I should have just kept it here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to revisit this
Yeah.
in order to change grammatical issues to keep them correct.
Yes.
All those favor
And to revisit.
and to deal with trade.
Yes.
All right.
Cool.
Okay, so just after India happened, we had a pretty robust discussion about first two and ors. And then the possibility of like the list, going awry. So I do think that just, if we made a big, long discussion about that on, which one was it?
Southeast Asia.
Yeah,
Yeah,
South
yeah.
Asia. So maybe we should do the same. Like, it seems like if there was an issue there, it would be an issue here, and maybe we shouldn't get to it for India.
Southeast Asia, the one that's the 4 countries. 4 and 8, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I said South Asia. So the practice was to remove the second and or add in one or more of the following with a colon.
Motion for the one or more of the following thing.
Yeah, so after India, one or more of the following colon, remove and or. I think is the.
Yeah, it's in one or more of the following colon, and then we'll talk about the areas after. Yeah.
I think it's in one or more of the following.
Yeah, the end needs to be
Yeah.
right after India.
That just makes it a little bit more consistent with our discussions here.
Second. All those in favor? Okay. Let's look at trade. What was your next?
Another quick question. Get this, the other topics, drop the public health.
That is another point that we didn't, but
You are correct. We have dropped the
Official
public
names and a
from-
lot
I
of
feel
the
like there's
others.
slight differences from the others.
Yeah, this one, I mean, I don't really think it matters that much either way, but given that the action is directed toward the government of the country, I can see more of a reason to keep Republic of India, not that I think it immensely matters.
Agreed. I see it as a little different. I don't see it as a lot, but I do see the difference.
India is also apparently an unincorporated community in Texas.
Oh.
That makes a ton of sense.
That was
Let's
true.
engage with Texas.
That's
That's pretty cool.
I would agree with Rory that we should.
Somebody's gonna
Keep
come up with
public.
that.
Okay, can we look at trade? What was?
Just, discussions, conversations about trade being quite large, some potential small asks being topical, without really doing what we said. I'm curious if we can go back to the discussion of making it free trade agreements.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'd kind of like to make the case for this, if that's okay. Okay, so I think trade is everything. It's huge. It encompasses the other 2 areas probably. So I'm looking for an alternative to trade. I think that the alternative is free trade agreements, and I think it should be lowercase. And here's kind of the case. So free trade agreement is not defined in US statute. But there is a lively debate about what constitutes a free trade agreement, because when the executive does something with another country that looks like a free trade agreement, Congress tries to pass bills to say that was actually a free trade agreement, which means that it needs to have gone through Congress. So there is some from those bills, all of which have failed, that says that a free trade agreement means an international agreement approved by Congress. It's a well understood term that refers to comprehensive trade agreements approved by Congress. Now, admittedly, that's a little bit awkward because those are responding to actions that did not use Congress, but they're at least responding to actions that used governments, like between 2 governments, not between 2 businesses, which I think it's possible that economic engagement in the area of trade is just like making things move more smoothly between them. So I think it is not terribly well defined, but the NEG has like an ARG that it requires Congress, or that it's between governments, or that it requires a treaty, and I think that's preferable to trade alone. Yeah.
Motion.
Well, when we were talking about this before, did anyone have a reason to avoid the use of the term free trade agreements, or was the discussion just, would it add anything? Because if there's not a strong reason to avoid it, and there's the potential that it adds something, I think that seems like a good reason for inclusion.
I agree.
I think I was probably the one who was interpreted as speaking most against free trade agreements. And my answer to your question is, no, I don't think there's a disadvantage. I'm not sure the advantage is as big as other people think it is. About that, obviously. No, I don't think there's a disadvantage. I'd be fine with it.
So then I think the question is lowercase or not. My inclination for almost all of these is lowercase. And then plural versus not, I'll leave for like someone who knows more about grammar.
I feel like plural is fine because in one or more of the following being that means a singular is in, so it seems fine.
So I move to insert free trade agreements after technology, comma.
Second or second?
Second.
Yeah, we'll change it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll need to be alphabetized, sorry.
Yeah.
So I'll, yeah, okay.
I would have put it in before environment.
I could say eliminate trade and insert it before environment.
We had a motion second.
Okay, so the motion and the second on the floor, I was waiting for the, I think, is to accept environment free trade agreements technology.
I think that's good.
We're good?
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna vote for it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There's a hand behind you.
Yes.
Trade agreements. Instead of a free trade agreement. Yeah, and if there's something meaningfully different about having environment and technology as subsection of,
Yes.
Well,
like, would it make sense to just have USMC should establish a free trade agreement with her? Does that encompass?
I really like that actually, but.
it is a big change, but what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm not opposed to it. As long as the consensus is it's not too one-dimensional.
I think that is the problem,
Or-
is that it will be too.
It's like the app has to be
I
free.
think it radically limits mechanisms.
Yeah,
That might be.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
How much time do we have left, Kevin? I think this is what we're talking about before.
I mean, I think I would not want to go to just free trade agreements, partly because there was a lot more in the paper than that. But also because we actually do a decent amount of trade with India already. And I would love for affirmatives to have some areas that we might not be working in quite so much. And I think environment in particular is one of those, but technology potentially also could be one of those, which means I think we should leave it open, particularly because we already trade a ton with India.
I think the case against it is election proofing, to be honest. Like there's a good chance that free trade agreement happens in like the next year and a half, and then it's just busted. Yeah. So I think having it as an option is good. Having other is probably good.
Move to accept?
Second.
All those.
Or no, we have, yeah. Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
right.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All those in favor? Okie dokie.
Thank you, Rory. Yeah.
Is there any further business?
So we'll get to the next part.
Very well. I really will give it back to you now. Tag, you're it.
Okay. I will take the resolved. Do we formally add resolved? We'll make that happen.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. So thank you for your good work. I do want to recognize the boarding committee and their work on your process today, so we please recognize them. Work they've done. Whether you've been on the wording committee know what it's like to be on the wording committee. Those who haven't, who've witnessed, it's a lot of work and stress for them. They take every word very seriously. So what we're going to do now is the wording committee is now adjourned. And so wording committee members, thank you again for all your work. They are now a normal attendee / state delegate or whatever the next role is going to be going tomorrow. We now have to vote on each of the following resolutions, passing by a 1/3 margin going into tomorrow's official voting time with the delegates. How that works, we need at least 19 people to vote for the topic in our official vote tomorrow. I will go through just like we did yesterday. I will read the papers. And just as a point of clarification, so I asked this yesterday, like, hey, why are we doing the no votes with this? My legal counsel said every time we take a vote, you have to vote approvals and ask for denials. And if you don't do that, it's not an official vote. And so Welcome to parliamentary procedure, right, Jana? All right, so that is why, maybe we're questioning why we had to do that, that is why, and we'll be doing that moving forward. So, what I will do is I'll read each, resolution as they are. Don't worry, it will say the word resolve tomorrow on each one of them before we put it into the actual, votes for the ballot tomorrow. But just for right now, we're just gonna go this way. So, first topic is India. Again, oh, sorry, one more point of clarification. Just like yesterday, everyone in the room is a voter today. So, keep that. All right, India. The United States federal government should substantially increase its diplomatic and economic engagement with the Republic of India in one or more of the following environmental free trade agreements technology. Raise your hand to move on to tomorrow. I'll say that's more than 19. Okay. Raise your hand if you do not approve for tomorrow. Okay. Next, we have South Asia. The United States federal government should substantially increase its defense cooperation with one or more South Asian countries. Raise your hand to move on to tomorrow. Great. Raise your hand to not move on to tomorrow. Okay. We move it on tomorrow. Next, we have maritime. The United Nations should substantially strengthen its laws of the sea governing freedom of navigation and or exclusive economic zones. Raise your hand to move on to tomorrow. Okay, keep your hands up just to make sure. Okay, raise your hand to now move on to tomorrow. Okay, we do hit the third threshold to move on to tomorrow, so we'll go on to tomorrow. Next, we have transnational crime. The United States federal government should significantly strengthen its international interdiction efforts combating transnational organized crime and drug trafficking and or financial crimes. Raise your hand to move on to tomorrow. Okay, keep your hands up just to make sure. Okay, raise your hand to now move on to. Okay, now we'll be moving on as well. Next, we have 4 and 8. The United States federal government should substantially increase its humanitarian assistance and or bilateral development assistance to one or more of the following: Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam. Raise your hand to move on to tomorrow. Okay, raise your hand to now move on to tomorrow. Okay, maybe moving on. The Arctic. The United States federal government should significantly increase its exploration and or development of the Arctic. Raise your hand to move on to tomorrow. Raise your hand to not move on to tomorrow. Okay, we'll move that on to. Military presence. The United States federal government should significantly reduce its military presence in one or more of the following: Iran, Japan, Kuwait, South Korea. Raise your hand to move on to tomorrow. Okay, raise your hand to not move on to tomorrow. All right, we're moving on. Next, we have Central Asia.
Been waiting for this all afternoon.
All right, well, I'm gonna cheat today, but I'll be ready tomorrow.
Do you want a proxy?
I would like a proxy. Central Asia. The United States federal government should substantially increase its diplomatic and or economic engagement with one or more of the following stand countries. Raise your hand and move on to tomorrow. Raise your hand to not move on to tomorrow. Okay, we'll be moving that on as well. Next, we have nation state recognition. The United States federal government should grant state recognition to one or more de facto states. Raise your hand to move on to tomorrow. Okay, raise your hand to not move on to tomorrow. All right, we'll move that on. Human trafficking. The United States federal government should substantially strengthen its international interdiction efforts combating transnational human trafficking. Raise your hand to move on to tomorrow. Okay, keep your hands raised. Okay, yep, so unfortunately, go ahead and raise your hand to not move on to tomorrow. Okay, so unfortunately, this one will not be moving on to tomorrow. Next, we have counterterrorism. The United States federal government should substantially strengthen its counterterrorism policies to combat international state-sponsored terrorism. Raise your hand and move on to tomorrow. Okay, raise your hand to not move on to tomorrow. Okay, we move this one forward. And finally, we have climate migrants. The United States federal government should establish a climate mobility policy to substantially increase its support of international climate migrants. Raise your hand to move on to tomorrow. Okay, and raise your hand to not move on to tomorrow. All right, we'll move that on as well. I want to take a moment for us as an organization to recognize all of the authors and the hard work they put in to everything they've done for the last year. It's a 10-month process, so please congratulate all the authors for making it. We appreciate everything that they put into this. It's a lot of work and it's a hard process and hard meeting. So hopefully it's been an enjoyable experience. And you've learned a lot going through the experience. We encourage all the authors to author again next year as well. Hey Kyle, can you bring my computer up real quick? I need to get that PowerPoint. Kevin, I'm gonna switch the. Okay. So everyone converse amongst yourselves for a moment and you switch over and everyone will just switch.
Now, if you stay on it, it'll be fine. Because this is for the people.
Converse among ourselves.
And no one's doing it, which is awesome. I'm sorry. No, you're fine. I'm really glad no one's conversing amongst themselves.
Yeah.
And no one's doing it, which is awesome. I'm sorry. You're fine.
My golly, you're conversing amongst yourself. With quite a.
I'm really glad no one's conversing amongst themselves.
Is that related to people cursing over the air?
High Street. It's in case we have to bleep him out.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, so what we have here is the suggested topics for next year's meeting. If you can scan this QR code, it should, if I didn't, take you to a form where you can submit topics for next year. As what we're going to do for topic authors. If you also want, you can take this notes out in the rest of the world. It's going to come as well. What we do is we will have a straw poll vote on this tomorrow after the final voting to get an indication of the amount of interest there would be in a potential topic for the report.